When you think of Disney games on Nintendo consoles, like many gamers you'll no doubt instantly think of the NES and Super Nintendo eras. Capcom crafted some of the most well respected, fun to play and memorable Disney games of the 8 and 16-bit eras. I have countless memories as a child of playing games such as DuckTales, Rescue Rangers and Goof Troop, and it would be hard to disagree that Capcom Disney games weren't the golden era of Disney games. Between 1996 and 2002, during the Nintendo 64's lifespan, it's fair to say that Disney games were no longer the must-own titles they were on previous generations. But that's not to say that there were not some fun games to play for anyone who enjoyed the Disney magic on a home console. And so for today's video, we're taking a look at all of the games on the Nintendo 64 which came from Disney. For the purpose of clarity, I'd also just like to highlight that these will only be the Disney games from the time of the game's release, so don't expect any Star Wars titles on this list now. And if you like the look of any of the games featured and want to learn more about them, then please check out the video description where I've posted links to the individual game reviews which I've completed over the years that go into much more detail than I will be able to here. Donald Duck Goin' Quackers is a year 2000 release, developed and published by Ubisoft. The game landed on multiple platforms including the PlayStation 1 and 2, Dreamcast, and handhelds like the Game Boy Advance. And a cool fact, it's one of the few games to get both an N64 and a GameCube release. If you're a fan of Crash Bandicoot, then you'll feel instantly at home here, as the developers clearly took inspiration from that series' success and crafted this game in a similar vein. There are both vertical and horizontal based levels, and a boss battle at the end of each world. The storyline is that Daisy Duck has discovered the temple of the evil magician Murloc, and is then kidnapped. Gladstone sets out to try and rescue her before Donald, and so whilst the game is your basic rescue the princess style affair, the constant one-upmanship between Donald and Gladstone stops the story from getting stale too soon. The game plays fairly well, with the controls being responsive enough to not become an issue, and the overall presentation is nicely done. There's the option of a high resolution mode with the expansion pack in your console, and for once the game doesn't totally suck if you enable the better visuals. Saying that though, with the game being on so many different platforms including the next generation systems, it's really hard to recommend playing the Nintendo 64 release. But there are many differences between all of the systems. If you do fancy checking out this title, I would suggest that you read over the differences on the Wikipedia page, which may help you to decide which version you want to give your time to. It's not a terribly long game, but it is fun from start to finish, so it's perfect for a weekend playthrough. Capcom were absent for much of the Nintendo 64's lifespan, and so when news broke that Capcom were finally starting to develop for the console, us fanboys were instantly hyped, expecting to get a Street Fighter entry onto the console. Our excitement then ramped up a whole nother notch when they confirmed in 1998 that they were working on a Disney game, and I remember everyone losing their minds thinking about a new DuckTales game coming out. We'd have arguments at school about which Disney character they should use or which Disney property would make an awesome game. Then imagine our disappointment when they quickly announced that it was in fact Magical Tetris Challenge, and the game was so quickly made that it would be out in a matter of weeks. As a multi-platform release, it was surprising that the PlayStation version never landed in North America, and so I expect if any of you are watching this who have played the game, it will likely be the Nintendo 64 version. Now, despite my disappointment that it wasn't the Capcom and Disney game I was hoping for, the actual game is fun to play unless you are a classic Tetris purist. The quest mode sees you pick one of 4 characters who each have their own unique storyline, but it essentially boils down to speaking to another character in the game. They need you to play them at Tetris, and if you win the game the storyline progresses. But of course few people would have picked this up for the storyline, and so in terms of gameplay it is quite nicely made. The additional new Tetris pieces feel right at home and will make the game feel fresh for the first time when playing it. The new Tetris pieces also allow you to craft 5-line Tetrises called pentominoes, and these come in handy when trying to clear your board and sending pieces over to your opponent's screen. The game is entirely 2D and the visuals are nicely done, but I feel they lack the polish that I would have expected from Disney, having insisted on them. Some of the characters like Donald Duck look a little bit washed out and the colours are slightly off, but any casual Disney fan may not even notice this. Overall, it's a hard game not to like. The single player experience is shallow and shouldn't take you too long to complete, but the multiplayer offerings are robust, and there's plenty of gameplay modes to enjoy with 2 to 4 players. So let me know in the comments below if you prefer classic Tetris games or which of the new style Tetris games is your thing. Mickey's Speedway USA is an often forgotten title. Landing on the console in late 2000, many people are also surprised to learn that it was in fact made by Rare. The reason I say that is because it seems to lack that classic Rare feel that you can't quite explain, but I'm sure you all know what I mean. When I heard Rare were making a Disney kart racer, I was hoping for a Diddy Kong racing style adventure, but what we got was more akin to a Mario Kart style game. Now that's not a bad thing, but the game doesn't have as much depth as Diddy's offering, but it was a fairly quick project for Rare to work on and didn't have the same attention on it as their other blockbuster titles. With 6 Disney characters to choose from as well as 4 to unlock, there's plenty of Disney charm in the sense that the courses take place across North America in varied locations from Seattle to Texas. They did a great job on making each of the tracks feel unique, but visually it doesn't seem as high quality as other Rare offerings. This was partly to ensure that the game runs like butter, which it does, and you'll have no slowdown at all to deal with. The controls are tight, the story mode is just about acceptable, and if you've overdosed on Mario Kart and DKR, then this could be the welcome break that you've been looking for to mix up your multiplayer racing sessions. Perhaps the weakest Disney game on the Nintendo 64 was A Bug's Life. While the movie may have been beaten DreamWorks' movie Ants at the box office when it was released in 1999, the game won't be beating many other platformers. With 15 levels, a plot which mostly follows the movie, and many of the cast lending their vocal talents to the CD-based releases, it was the horrible gameplay and level design which led this to be reviewed poorly. The Nintendo 64 version is even more stripped back, with static cutscenes and text to progress the game's story, and visuals which are quite honestly terrible. Throw in the fiddly controls, a poor camera, and levels which often leave you wondering what to do next, you'll quickly realise that this isn't a game that you want to be a completionist of. My tip is just avoid this title, but if you were unlucky enough to own it as a kid back in the day, then I'd love to know what you thought of it in the comments section. Dance Dance Revolution Disney Dancing Museum has the longest title of any Nintendo 64 Disney game, but this was a Japanese exclusive title. Unlike some DDR games, this one was released as both a bundle with the dance mat included, as well as a separate game release for those that didn't want it. The dance mats are becoming increasingly hard to get hold of these days, and the big box edition with the mat included is something of a collector's piece. Still, even with the controller as your input device, the game is pretty much what you would expect from a DDR title, but the most fun is naturally going to be with the dance mat attached. With the Disney theme, you'll pick songs which are either loosely linked to the Disney universe, or they throw in characters who would fit the song you'll be playing. The game does suffer from a lack of tracks to play through, and many of them are quite easy. If you're a big DDR fan, then I expect that you'd likely blow through the entire game in a couple of hours, racking up perfect scores along the way. And even on the higher difficulties, it doesn't really pack much of a challenge when using the N64's D-pad. Still, the 22 tracks in the game do cover a range of styles from classical to pop, and with the ability to play with friends, I really think that's how this game should be played. I would assume that the dance mat accessory would make the game trickier to play, and therefore throw in more longevity. But the art style in the game is worth checking out as I really enjoyed it. It's just a shame that the frames of animation are so limited. With Disney releasing Tarzan into movie theatres as their 37th feature-length animated movie, it was no surprise by that time that the video games would follow. Now I remember being particularly interested in this title after hearing it would be a 2.5D platform game and seeing screenshots of it in magazines. Following the plot of the movie, you'll start the game playing as young Tarzan, and you'll need to learn the skills to progress through the game from your trusty sidekick Turk. As the story progresses, you'll then play as adult Tarzan, and it handles slightly differently depending on which age of Tarzan you're playing as. I don't think there's anything not to like about this game. The graphics have their own unique charm to them, the gameplay is fairly solid enough, on a little easy side if you are being critical, especially for those who are experienced platform game fans. The character and enemy designs are nicely done, and the limited voice acting in the game is also a welcome addition when we were so often starved of voiceovers on the Nintendo 64. Like most platform games of the time, there's plenty of collectibles to pick up, and in doing so you'll earn new lives, scenes from the movie, and bonus levels which are surprisingly fun to play. The only real negative I can say about the game is its handling. As Tarzan moves on his hands and his feet as both child and adult, there's a strange momentum feel to the character, and this can make some jumping sections trickier than they really should be. Still, for anyone like me who loves 2D and 2.5D games, this one is a must play. It's a fairly easy game with only 14 levels, but you'll complete it well before you become bored of it. I personally feel that the game is better than the movie, but what do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Tigger's Honey Hunt came from Doki Doki Studio in the year 2000 as both a PlayStation and a Nintendo 64 release for home consoles. Whilst it may not be a developer you've come across before, the game itself is mostly aimed at younger gamers and is therefore a more simplistic 2D platformer. You'll take on the role as Tigger as he travels across the 100-acre wood to collect honey pots for Winnie the Pooh's party celebrations. You'll interact with other characters such as Owl, Rabbit and Piglet, and as you progress through the game, you'll come across the 6 different areas and also complete mini-games along the way. Now maybe I'm getting older, but I really enjoyed the almost watercolour-esque graphical style to the game. But I wouldn't agree with 64 magazine, and that's not to be confused with my beloved N64 magazine, that this was the most faithful representation of any cartoon character on any games machine so far. Those same Muppets at 64 magazine also gave the game a 92% score, which is absurd. The game plods along at a slow pace, you'll learn new moves which will help you reach new areas, and so there is some backtracking in the game. The controls were my biggest gripe as Tigger handles far too floaty, which makes some of the platforming sections fiddly, and pulling off some of his moves was harder than it should have been thanks to a slightly unresponsive control. It doesn't make this a bad game, but there are so many other great 3D and 2D platform games on the system that I feel most gamers don't need to go out of their way to experience this one. If you do insist, then you may want to check out the PlayStation 1 version which has cutscenes and speech. Toy Story 2 is perhaps the game which everyone remembers the most because quite honestly, it's based off one of the best movies ever made. On the back of that, like many young people, I also couldn't wait to revisit the world in which the movie takes place with the release of Toy Story 2 on N64. Developed by Traveller's Tales and published by Activision in 1999, Toy Story 2 follows the plot of the movie as closely as possible, and that's not a bad thing. You'll play as Buzz Lightyear and work your way through the various levels using your power-ups to complete the objectives and earn tokens. Buzz upgrades as the game progresses, and like Banjo-Kazooie, each level often has multiple tasks for you to complete to earn more tokens. Whilst the game is definitely fun to play, the most interesting thing about the game's development was that Activision's offices were actually protested against by the Hispanic community. They didn't like the villain who had a moustache, a bullet bandolier and a sombrero, and so after a peaceful protest they changed the villain to avoid offending the Hispanic community. On its release the game was met with favourable reviews, and rightly so. The graphics are good enough, the handling is fine, and there's plenty of variation in the level objectives, and the level designs do keep you coming back because they are unique and interesting. So even the most die-hard Toy Story fan will continue playing this game right the way to the end. Sure, at times the camera can be tricky, but if you can overlook some minor flaws in the game, it's one which is likely to bring you as much happiness as the movies themselves. My advice though is to play the Dreamcast version, which is the best of the home console editions. It also has additional content not found in the N64 cart release. And so there you have it, the 8 Disney games which were released on the Nintendo 64. It's interesting to see that the games spanned so many genres and also came from so many different developers and publishers. Whilst Capcom's offering wasn't quite what we hoped it was great to see other studios flexing and delivering some truly unique games for us to enjoy. And so for today's topic of conversation, I'd love to know what your favourite Nintendo 64 Disney game was and why. Did you pick any of these titles up on launch like myself, or were you often cautious, waiting to see reviews before renting or buying these games? It would also be cool if you let me know if you think any of these games deserve remasters for the modern platforms, or if they are best left alone as a product of their time. As always though, sound off in the comment section down below, and until next time.